Welcome to the Municipal Voice, CCM's radio podcast in collaboration with WNHH 103.5 FM, connecting Connecticut's municipalities. We are the source for news on the municipal level across the state of Connecticut. I'm your host, Matt Ford, and in the studio with me today is Brandon Robertson, Town Manager of Avon, and CCM's George Rafael, Director of the Municipal Resource and Service Center. Today we're going to be talking about budgets and stuff, but on a side note, because tomorrow is Valentine's Day, Brandon, I understand you have a personal connection to CCM. Could you tell everybody what that's about?
How appropriate. My wife is going to love this.
Exactly. That's why I'm setting you up.
So, hard to believe, but about 20 years ago, I was the assistant to the town manager in Tolland.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, town manager gives me an assignment to go research something. I called CCM, talked to Tolland's research associate.
Yeah.
Nice young lady, had a great conversation. Mm-hmm. We got to talking. And come to find out, she was going to be starting at the MPA program at UConn the next semester, which I was already in.
There you go.
And we found out that we were enrolled for the same class, and how appropriate, government finance and budgeting.
Government finance
Couldn't
budgeting.
believe it.
Wow.
Right. It's a matchmaker.
That's a romantic story right there, government finance. So speaking of government finance and budgeting,
yes,
that's why we got you both of you here today to talk about budgeting on the state and municipal level. So everyone has a budget, including the government, the United States, federal, state, municipal. And Brandon, you're an expert in municipal budgeting. Can you give us a brief overview of what that process looks like in a town like Avon?
Sure, you bet. Happy to. It's really interesting because, you start off with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. We're all trying to get to the same thing, which is an adopted budget by July 1st, which is the start of our municipal fiscal year.
Yeah.
But the way that towns and cities do it, the critical path they follow is all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I think Avon's is a good example. We, include a lot of the steps that most towns and cities will have. And, again, for a budget that is effective for July 1st, we begin our process late summer, early fall, before that.
The previous year.
Previous year. So August and September, I'm basically, putting out direction to department heads and asking for budget proposals, both operating and capital.
Okay.
Those come back in, let's say September, October, something in that time frame. Then we start a conversation. And, we have that conversation individually with department heads, talk about it collectively as a group, and ask ourselves a number of questions about what our priorities are going into the next fiscal year. So basically that process is complete by, say, the middle of December or so.
Okay.
By that point, the Board of Education will have adopted a budget.
Which is not part of your process.
Which is not part of my process directly as the town manager, but I take their budget proposal, include it with my proposed budget, and then that becomes the town manager's overall proposed budget.
So you're developing the town half of it, where the board does their half, and then you're putting those two together.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we combine it. So that brings us to, let's say, the first week in February, which is when my budget goes to the town council.
Okay.
But we've got a long way to go. Because
it's not done yet.
No, it's not done. Not by a long shot. Because the town council takes a look at it. We have a dialogue, a conversation, talk about priorities. They recommend or they make any adjustments they wish to make. And then they'll adopt the budget, at which point it becomes the town council budget.
Okay.
But we're not done yet.
Oh, it's not approved. Okay.
Not done yet. The next step is that it goes to the Board of Finance. And most communities that have a Board of Finance know that the Board of Finance is the budget-making authority.
Okay.
And
not all towns do?
Not all towns
in Connecticut even? Okay.
Not all towns in Connecticut have it.
Okay.
But in the towns that do, that's their role. And they kind of look at the budget from a macro perspective.
Okay.
So council budget goes to the Board of Finance. They have a public hearing to gauge public sentiment, what's been proposed. Then they have a workshop, at which point they decide what they're comfortable putting out to the referendum. One more stop, there is a town meeting, so the community can be further educated about what's included in the proposed budget. And then final stop is the town meeting adjourns to the referendum. And if all goes well, knock on wood, by the middle of May, we've got an adopted budget that goes into effect July 1st.
Okay.
If it doesn't, then the town charter provides a process that we need to follow, and we kind of retrace our steps.
Okay, so you don't just shut down the town government? If
you don't just shut down the town government.
It still has to happen.
That's right. It still has to happen.
So towns across the state of Connecticut rely on money from the state, which the state has its own budget. George, there's a budget proposal coming up from Governor Lamont, his first. And budget generally has been fraught in the past. What are we looking for in this budget, and how might it impact local government?
Sure. So obviously the state budget has huge implications for municipal budgets. And the first thing we look for, first and foremost, is the municipal aid levels.
Okay.
So we're looking at which grants are being funded and at what levels. And we try to get that information out to municipal officials as quickly as possible, because as Brandon said, they're smack dab in the middle of their budget process. So they need these numbers. They rely on these estimates.
So they're getting these numbers right around now.
Yes.
But they've been working on it since last
they've
year.
been working on their budget since last summer or in fall, as Brandon alluded to. But they need to know what the state's going to provide them, at least some rough estimates, so they can build their budget and get it to the citizens. So, the state provides about $3 billion in municipal aid to local government. So, as you can imagine, it's something we watch closely. Municipal officials watch closely. So, obviously, the municipal aid levels. In particular, municipal officials want to know, how much is my town getting? So again, they can build those numbers into their budget
based on that.
Exactly, because it's again, you're talking $3 billion, which is a significant amount of money that goes into municipal budget. So they're building that information, and because of the timeline, and again, Brandon alluded to this, because of the timeline. A lot of towns have to get budgets adopted before the state budget's completed. So these initial estimates, in some cases, are really the only estimates of state grants that towns have to work with.
Okay. Before they're supposed to adopt their budgets?
Before their budgets are adopted. And there's some towns that are early adopters of their municipal budgets, and so those are the ones most impacted because they're relying on those numbers. So then we'll look at the municipal aid. Then we'll look at any policy changes that are part of the budget document that could impact municipal finance. Something that's going to add or subtract revenues.
Such as?
It could be a new revenue options. A few years ago, they offered a part of the state sales tax to municipalities through a revenue sharing grant. As has happened in the past, that got eliminated, unfortunately.
So it didn't actually come to fruition.
It did for a short time, and then it was pulled because of the state's budget issues. So we look at policy changes related to that, and we look at other policy changes that impact the cost side as well. So it could be something that's a new mandate, which I think we'll talk a little bit about.
Yeah, we'll definitely cover some of that in a minute.
Mandates are obviously a significant issue. Or it could be just some new initiative that municipalities are going to be required to do that. Adds cost to their budget. And once we get that initial kind of view of the budget, we take a little bit of a deeper dive to find out some things buried in the budget that may have implications for municipal finance.
That's the CCM research department and
it's essentially the government finance piece of the CCM research function, and it's something that our members really rely on, again, because they're in many cases flying blind without having those state numbers.
So speaking of state numbers and the importance. What, Brandon, is the difficulties for you as a town when you get your budget numbers late? Like, you're already in the process. How does that work?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's really tricky. And, I think George did a great job of explaining the importance of, intergovernmental revenue to the communities. And, they're a blessing and a curse. And, the more that you rely on intergovernmental revenue coming from the state.
That's the state aid,
Exactly, state aid. The more difficulty you have projecting what you should be budgeting for that aid when we have to have our budgets completed prior to the state. Now, Avon, for instance, say we're getting about 3.5% of our total budget that's coming in from the state. So, it's important to be able to project that accurately because, if the state aid doesn't come in as anticipated, when we budgeted too high, too optimistically, well then, you've got an adopted state budget, you've got an adopted local budget, but you've got revenue shortfalls in your local budget
that you don't match up.
Have to make up for. It's important to keep in mind that, for municipalities, by and large, for the most part, the two most important and largest revenue sources are going to be your property tax and it's going to be your intergovernmental revenue. So as you're going through and thinking about next year's budget, let's say that there are anticipated reductions in intergovernmental revenues. You only have so many places to go. You can hope that you can, grow your grand list out of it,
Yeah.
Maybe there are, non-tax revenues that you can increase. But, the fail-safe and the typical fallback is the mill rate.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got a local environment that is, adverse to another increase in property taxes,
Most
which
places
most are,
yeah.
right? We've got ability and or willingness to pay.
Yeah.
Then you've got to go to the expenditure side. And when you start looking at the expenditure side, there are no good choices at that point.
Yeah, because I mean, you're covering healthcare, pensions, all that kind of stuff.
You're covering all of it. You're covering your capital infrastructure, which you need to continue to invest in.
Yeah.
You're covering your service levels. And at this point, we have no what I would call discretionary services that we can just decide to eliminate.
You can't just cut the police.
You can't just cut. Now, you can reduce the quality of those services, but
that's also not
a
popular
choice.
usually.
Not a choice you want to make. So, unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is when you're really pushed and you've got these reductions in intergovernmental aid, there is a reluctance to increase the mill rate. You're left with bad decisions, which are, let's not fully fund the annual required contribution for the pension plan or for other post-employment benefits. And those are things that may not be immediately apparent to residents, but certainly when it comes time for the rating agencies to review your financials in anticipation of selling debt, these are not good things.
Yeah, kicking the can down the street. This has been causing problems with the state for a little while now. So.
Precisely, yes. And this is in part, why the state is in the position they're in, because they haven't adequately funded over time their long-term requirements for pension and to a lesser extent other post-employment benefits.
Yeah. Speaking of not funding requirements and such, one of our kind of perennial issues with CCM is the unfunded mandate. George, can you explain a little bit what we mean when we talk about unfunded mandates and kind of their impact?
Sure. So, in terms of municipal government, unfunded mandates are federal and state laws or regulations that they require a local government agency to perform, or a local municipal government to perform without providing any funding to do that. And in a lot of cases, it's something either that at the federal or state level, it's something that they no longer want to or can do, possibly because of fiscal issues. So they push it down to the local level. And, municipal officials, they can't pass the buck at that point. There is nowhere else to go besides the local level. So you're required to do it. It could be something as simple as filing an annual report with the state, or one issue we have perennially is posting legal notices in newspapers as opposed to doing it electronically. There's a cost associated with that.
So there's a law out there that says legal notices have to be printed in the newspaper.
Correct.
Even a law, I assume, was written when newspapers were the main way to get that kind of information out.
Correct. So we have technology to allow it on the website, but there are folks who push back on that every year, and so we don't get a lot of traction on that. But there's a cost associated with that. And then you could have something larger, a prevailing wage for municipal construction projects, or requiring certain education programs or something tied to education. Those things have real costs and real dollars associated to them. And just to give you a kind of a framework, currently by our count and by count through the state as well, there are over 1,300 state mandates on municipal government. That's just state, that's not federal. That are either unfunded or underfunded.
Underfunded, and they're not providing all the money to do what they say.
Correct. And in most cases, they're just, you shall do this, and there's no funding tied along with it. So, and, in some cases, you can argue that those mandates are good public policy. There's a lot of folks who will say, this is actually a good public policy.
So the law, the rule might be a good idea. They just have to, if they think it's a good idea, they have to figure out where the money's coming from to pay for it.
Yeah, you've got to evaluate the rule or the regulation or the statute to say, is this good public policy? And if there's a general agreement that there is, if it's good public policy, then it needs to be funded. It shouldn't just be put on the back of municipal government, because that's kind of the lowest level of government at this point. So, so I think it's something we generally fight. And that 1,300 number, that changes. There's dozens, if not hundreds, proposed every year.
So that's kind of the base level that we're working at right now, and we're trying to bring them down. Other forces tend to bring it up.
Yeah, so it's kind of a one step forward, two steps back, where we'll be successful in repealing one or two mandates, but then there'll be 3 or 4 new ones put upon towns.
So it's an ongoing thing.
It is.
It's
a constant fight. It's a constant fight.
It's just that, I guess, structural in some ways, that people as they might want to pass things that they think are good ideas or popular ideas.
Sure. And
but
again,
if they don't have to think about the flames, they can just say, okay, this is a good idea, go do it.
And
they're going to have that urge to do that to make people happy.
That's right, Matt. That's right. And so one example is a couple of years ago, they proposed there's a program called the Renter's Rebate, which provides checks to low-income renters. And they had essentially wanted to stop funding that, and then having the administration go down to the municipal level, which municipalities had never administered the program
at all. So they have to start from scratch.
Right. So it became a fiscal reason why they decided to do that. And obviously we fought it, our members fought it, and we were able to defeat that. But we're always on the lookout for those because it happens regardless. Good budget year, bad budget year, good fiscal times, bad fiscal times, these unfunded mandates and underfunded mandates constantly come down on.
Okay. Well, Brandon, can you talk about how firsthand as a town person, how unfunded mandates affect you?
Sure. So, as I was saying earlier, when it comes to making hard decisions about reducing expenditures, it's particularly hard because there isn't a lot left that is simply discretionary that a local government performs.
Because some things are mandated, so it's like, have to do this, have to do that.
Precisely.
With this leftover, what do we do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, when you think about the mandates that are in place, I mean, there are a lot of things that, the state simply requires the towns to do. And, CCM is excellent in terms of keeping us ahead of the curve, helping us to plan, and, requiring us to provide them with information so then they can educate the legislators about, what these topics really mean to towns and cities were they to be adopted. Okay. But, again, you have to project. And, if it appears that a mandate is going to be enacted, then, at the local level, you have to plan for it. And you get into a discussion like you would for any service. What's the best way to do it? Yeah. Is it something that we have the capacity to do in-house? Is it something that we need to, contract with an outside party to provide? You get into kind of a service delivery discussion.
I need to do a station ID right now. You are listening to WNHH 103.5 FM, broadcasting live from downtown New Haven. We are streaming live on TuneIn Radio and newhavenindependent.org. We are also streaming live on Facebook Live. Just go to facebook.com/newhavenindependent and also check out ccm-ct.org. All right, so back to what we were talking about. Sort of related to what you were talking about, municipal spending caps. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how that plays into your budgeting?
Sure. Well, that's a relatively new phenomenon. And I would refer to that as a soft cap. And it first came on the scene, I guess it was adopted by the legislature back in 2016.
Okay.
And for municipalities, it was effective on our fiscal year 18 budgets.
Okay.
So
it just started last year.
Yeah. So basically the way the cap works is, and it was tied to a new revenue sharing mechanism at the time that was never funded, to George's point earlier.
Okay.
And the program has my favorite acronym ever. It was called the Municipal Revenue Sharing Account, MRSA, right? So the whole idea was that if your budget grew by 2.5% or the rate of inflation, whichever was greater, you would absorb some kind of a penalty to this grant that was to be given to you through the MRSA program. Okay. And there were a whole lot of exemptions to that cap. So, for instance, if you were funding unfunded pension liabilities, that was an expenditure you didn't need to apply towards the cap. If you had arbitrated collective bargaining settlements, you didn't have to apply that towards the cap. But, again, the bottom line was that I think the state didn't want this new revenue to facilitate increases in local budgets. Now, again, that revenue
never showed up.
That revenue was never funded. It was never appropriated by the legislature.
But the rule of the cap did happen?
The rule remains. So I guess you can exceed the cap and there's no penalty for doing it.
Because there's no money not to get.
It's an unfunded program.
Okay, so they tried to do it with a carrot and the carrots didn't show up.
That's a good way of putting it.
All right.
Right.
One thing I think was interesting we touched on a little bit, George, is you were saying about, or you were also saying giving information to CCM. So your department isn't just taking the state's budget, looking through it, and reporting to the towns. The towns are giving you information that you're then using to explain our positions to the state? Is that the way it works?
Sure. So in terms of the state budget, it's generally us gathering the information and providing it to municipal officials. But in other aspects of the legislative process, whether let's say there's a bill, there's a bill to do something that impacts municipalities. Well, and we know it's in our view, it's bad public policy, and we have the reasons for it. We'll put it in our testimony. But legislators and administration wants to know what the impact is on municipal government. And so, especially if they want to know the impact. If you're a state senator or representative, you want to know the impact on your district.
On your town, or your district.
So we'll go to members, we'll go to Brandon and his counterparts across the state and ask them to give us information to say, what will be the impact of this piece of legislation if it goes forward on your town? We'll compile that information and include it in our testimony, or provide it to the committee that's reviewing the bill, or to the administration if it's something that's being pushed by the administration. So it is a two-way street.
Yeah.
You know, they know, they're the boots on the ground. They know what's happening and what the impact is going to be on their town. We can give some general estimates statewide, but there's nothing better than having those concrete numbers from the municipal officials who deal with it every day.
And do you find that from the legislators and the state people, they appreciate getting our information too? Like they want to base it on real numbers? Absolutely,
Matt. They absolutely do. It's something that in some cases they have to justify their position on a bill. So they can say, look, the reason I can't support this is because I look at my district and these 4 towns are going to lose a combined $1 million.
Yeah.
Or it's going to cost them X amount of dollars, or it's going to cause some other issue in the town. So having that conversation with our members and municipal officials is critical to
just to have those numbers to back them up.
Sure, to educate, and sometimes it is an education process. And something, the unintended consequences of, again, it could be good public policy, but when you start looking at administering it, and you get down to the actual putting it in practice, you realize it could be fraught with issues. And so having that conversation with our members is great.
That is great. Briefly going back to the unfunded mandates thing, are there any that CCM are looking at coming up, such as motor vehicle tax changes, property tax changes, or the teacher retirement system?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of, anybody who's been following the news, and listeners probably know that there's been a lot of proposals that have been coming out at the start of the session here regarding property tax, motor vehicle tax. So we're always on the lookout for those kinds of bills that'll impact municipal government. One we're always watching, and Brandon alluded to this when he talked about the property tax is really the only place to go. So anytime there's something that a piece of legislation or proposal to add to the exemptions of property tax exemptions, we're always wary of that. So we're always
like hospitals,
so
colleges, that kind of stuff.
Right now there's over 70 that are in statute tax exempt categories for the property tax in the state. So we're always looking at that issue, because property tax is such a big, it is the fucking funding mechanism for municipal services. You mentioned motor vehicles. So there have been proposals to eliminate the motor vehicle tax over I don't know how many years now. And I think there's consensus that the motor vehicle tax is problematic. Okay. It's problematic.
For what reasons?
It's you're trying to tax something that has wheels that can move
town to town,
out of state.
I definitely knew people in college who kept it, on their parents or whatever, because it was a cheaper state, even though they were driving in Connecticut for 4 years.
Exactly. So there's that part of it, and that there's an administrative cost to try to track down folks who haven't paid their taxes,
towing and ticketing and
the whole 9 yards. Yeah, absolutely. So the administration is costly. The other issue is you have an argument that you have the same vehicle, you have a Honda Accord in one town, the same exact Honda Accord in a town in another part of the state pays significantly more in property taxes just because of the mill rates, the differential. So there's problems, and I think most people agree it's a problematic tax, and we should eliminate it. Here's the rub. The rub is that it generates about $900 million in local revenue.
Okay.
So if you eliminate the property tax without some other mechanism for that funding, you've got a $900 million hole.
That's the car tax.
That's the car tax alone. So you've got to make up for that somehow. And if there's no state mechanism to do that, the only other place you can go is to the other property taxpayers in town. And so that's higher taxes on your houses.
Town has its budget. We get rid of that car tax, everyone thinks that's great because we don't like paying our car tax, but it's just going to end up going right into your other property tax because it has to come from somewhere.
Right. You've got a fixed pot, if you will, of taxable property in a town, and so you eliminate a big chunk of that. It's got to be put on the burden's put on the rest of it.
Yeah. So. Brandon, another big one always is the teachers' retirement system. In our upcoming issue of our magazine, Connecticut Town and City, we spoke with a couple people for our Point Counterpoint about combining boards of ed with town finance. Where do you stand on that, and what we see would be the difficulties in doing something like that?
Yeah. I think it really depends. And you have to, if you're going to look at any type of consolidation or any potential intertown or intra-town cooperative effort, right?
Yeah.
You got to think about these critically. And I think too often, there's sort of a knee-jerk reaction where we say, oh, well, let's regionalize a service or let's consolidate it. Much must be better.
Yeah.
But I think that can set you up for, a false expectation. And I think there are a number of questions that you need to look at and ask. Okay. And you need to ask yourself, what is it we're really trying to achieve here? Is there some service that we're not able to provide the way we would like to be providing it? Do we really think there's a lot of excess capacity between the two departments that can somehow be consolidated and we can achieve savings that way?
Yeah.
So I think it starts with a conversation with our partners at the Board of Ed. And, once we get past those initial threshold issues, we have to define, what do we mean by consolidate? Are we talking about consolidating payroll, benefits administration, the accounting function? Are we talking about, consolidating sort of a finance director overall position? So all of those things need to be fleshed out, and you have to go into it understanding what a reasonable return on your investment is going to be. Because particularly if you've got offices that are in different locations, you're going to have to geographically consolidate.
Physically put them in the same building.
Physically get them in the same spot. And more often than not, you're working on, there are crossovers, but you're working on separate financial systems.
Okay.
So it's quite likely you'll have to go to a new financial software, which is also going to have a cost involved. One thing I'd say about consolidation, particularly at this level, is that for most towns, there's already a very tight relationship at the staff level between towns and Board of Ed staff that are working in this area.
Now, is that like a legal structure, or is that just it just happens that way?
It's a function of the financial reporting. And the fact is that, in 98% of the instances, the Board of Education is a component of the town's financial report.
Okay.
So whenever we create, financial statements, the Board of Education's activities are incorporated into those financial statements. And because of that, there's a whole lot of collaboration that has to occur at the staff level to make sure that, information is shared so it can be reported out accurately.
Okay. Related to the conversation about education and boards of ed, the minimum budget requirement, could you talk a little bit about that and kind of how that impacts your budgets?
Sure. So there's a long history with the minimum budget requirement, and it goes back to the mid-'70s.
Okay.
And the whole idea was that the state at the time did not want the towns to supplant local budget resources with state resources.
Okay.
So basically what they said is, look, there are some exclusions that apply, but generally, whatever you budgeted for education last year, you have to at least budget that amount again.
Okay.
And if you don't do that, then the following year, you'll be penalized by a reduction in the amount that you receive through the educational cost-sharing formula.
Okay, so if you don't spend as much as you did last year, we're going to give you even less the following year.
That's right. There are exceptions that apply, but generally,
that's
correct.
the general
That's the
idea.
gist.
Okay, and that is how is that a problem sometimes, or is it a problem?
Well, that can be a problem because you may have a reason that your budget could be less, but let's say it doesn't fall in.
Your population is shrinking.
Yeah, let's say it doesn't.
You have less students.
Right, or you've achieved some type of efficiency that is outside of the exceptions that are carved out in the statute. Then you don't get credit for achieving those efficiencies.
Yeah, it sounds like that you're disincentivized to find savings in your education budget because of this to a certain extent?
To some extent, I would argue that you're correct about that.
Okay. George, is there anything that we at CCM are looking for in the governor's proposal on education?
Yeah, so there's actually two significant pieces to the budget that impacts education from our perspective. And one Brandon talked about was the education cost sharing grant. So this is the essentially the large education grant that goes to municipalities. It's about $2 billion this year. And just to put that in perspective, that's about 10% of the state budget.
Okay, so it's not insignificant.
It's a huge amount. It's the largest state grant. It's the largest grant in the state. So it's about $2 billion, and there's a formula to distribute that to municipalities that uses enrollment numbers, it uses town wealth, and some other factors.
Okay.
So we're obviously looking to see the level that's going to be funded, if it's going to be around the same amount, a little bit more, a little bit less. So we're always looking for that. We're also looking for any changes or tweaks to the formula itself. So we're looking for anything that's proposed in that regard. The CCS, this Education Cost Sharing Grant, it's not fully funded, but the current law has a 10-year phase-in to get it to full funding. So obviously over 10 years, things can change and budget situations change. So we're wary that may actually happen. So we take it year by year.
10 years ago, we were right in the middle of the recession, and now knows we are.
Exactly.
Right now,
so there's no promises, and so at this point we look at it year by year. So we'll look at that. So the ECS grant is one of the first things we look at, and the other piece, and it's a growing issue for local government, is special education and the cost of special education. Now the total statewide costs are over $2 billion. And municipalities pay for about 60% of that. So that's over $1 billion funded by the property tax for special education. The state puts in a little bit of money. The state portion is distributed through a grant called excess cost.
Okay.
But the excess cost grant hasn't been increased in 10 years.
Okay.
It's about $140 million, and it's been at about that level for a decade. So
but the number of students and whatever has changed.
Right. The number of special education, special needs students has increased. The costs have increased. But that state component of funding it has stayed level. So we're looking at hopefully an increase there, or at least not a reduction at this point. So in terms of education, those are really the two big pieces that we initially look for in the budget.
All right. Brandon, so recently we do a video series called CCM Chats, and we spoke with Amy Traversa up in Marlboro. And she said, as becoming one of our certified municipal officials, she takes our workshops and stuff. And one of the workshops that she loved was actually yours that you did on budgeting. So this is your chance to geek out.
Yeah.
Well, how do you keep budgeting on a municipal level an interesting topic? Tell us on budgeting.
It's hard.
Yeah.
How much time do we have? Well, I mean, I think it's inherently an interesting topic because the budget really is how a community goes about articulating their priorities going forward. So, everybody should be engaged in the process.
Like showing up at the meeting.
From the staff, the elected officials, the public. I mean, there are a lot of moving parts, but it's really how you can, set your community on the right course going forward. And these are very hard, very sophisticated decisions we have to make. Because as we're all talking here, there are a lot of moving parts. You've got whatever the local willingness and or ability to pay is and how it translates into the property tax. You've got the part that's going on with the state in terms of what intergovernmental revenue you can anticipate. You've got, new expenditures that may be required as a result of the unfunded mandates that George was talking about. And then, the boots on the ground is we have a certain amount of office space that we have to be sure is maintained. We have a certain amount of fleet vehicles that have to be maintained to a certain level. We have to offer benefits and wages to employees that ensure we attract and retain great people. So you put all of those things, all of that discussion around that budget timeline I talked to you about earlier. And my question is, why wouldn't people want to pay attention to this? It's utterly fascinating.
It's their tax money at work.
It's their tax money. And they can all have a part. That's the thing I find.
Through the meetings you're talking about, that step by step, there are steps that
there
include
are
the
so
public.
many. There are so many points where the public can have a part. And what I always just get so upset with is in July when we have people coming in to pay their taxes, and a lot of the time, it's folks who are no longer escrowing. They come in, they write a check directly to the town, and they stop in my office and they'll say, "Well, what is this? Why are my taxes going up?" And you just want to say, "Wow." I mean, you just missed a great opportunity to see the whole thing from start to finish.
We just talked about it for several hours.
We just talked about it for 7 months.
Yeah.
But it's really a fascinating process. And, one of the things I always try to do as a appointed official is to make it as understandable as I possibly can for the public. The last thing you want to do is come into a meeting and get a bunch of jargon thrown at you and a bunch of acronyms.
Yeah.
I try to do it acronym free and just, explain it so that somebody walking in off the street can understand exactly what we're planning to do and why we're planning to do it.
That sounds great. So, anyone who's interested in local government, how their town's being run, the budget is really where the rubber meets the road, kind of. That's if they want to get in the thick of it and understand why things are done a certain way, there's your answer. That's
where the big decisions are made.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank our guests, Brandon Robertson and George Rafael. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM at WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer. Christopher Gilson is our producer. Harry Draws is on the boards. And I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like. And watch out for our CCM chat series on the YouTube page. Just click on links on our homepage. And find our app in the App Store on your iPhone or Android phone by searching for the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. And we're going to play out now with a interview we did with Amy Traversa for our CCM chat series. So enjoy that and see you next time.
To being in business prior to this. Anybody coming in who hasn't been a part of the municipal world or the state world, everything is new. There are changes. So I'm constantly calling the people at CCM to ask about legislative issues, about budgetary issues. How do I do this? Who do I contact about that? There's a lot of people who have a lot of answers.
Can you tell us about how you first heard about the Certified Connecticut Municipal Official Program, or CCMO as we call it?
Actually, I believe that I heard about it at the first year that I was in office, when they were first rolling it out at the CCM conference.
So perfect timing for you, being new and a new program.
Absolutely perfect, as so many of the classes have been, especially when you're elected in November and you immediately go into a budget season. That makes all the difference in the world to have those resources available immediately.
The information and just experience.
Absolutely. So I took full advantage of all the classes as I needed the information and as classes were being offered where I had no background or needed additional information on a particular subject.
And what did you learn along the way?
Oh, tons. I've never dealt with union employees before. So that was enormous for me. It was an enormous benefit, and knowing what the steps were and meeting other people who were going through the same things that I was going through. The networking is also an incredible process. The people who are taking the CCMO coursework are people who are interested in advancing their careers or in learning more and doing a better job representing their towns. So meeting them and speaking with them is enormously helpful. And I can reach out to them and do reach out to them on an ongoing basis.
So you need to meet some of your peers. Is great.
Absolutely. The first selectman in Madison, Tom Banish, was a person who went through the CCMO program at about the same pace that I did. And he and I, from day one, from our first interaction, so very often he'll pick up the phone and call me and saying, who should I be talking to? Or I'll call him and say, what should I know about a particular issue?
Speaking about him moving through it pretty quickly, you in fact did it in 1 year, even though we give people 2 years to get through it. You got through it in one. So was it fun? Is that how you got through it?
It's really fun. There are some classes that just shouldn't be missed and can't be missed. Even though I've completed the program, I'm still signed up for a class this coming Saturday. So on a Saturday, in January, I'm taking a 4-hour class because the municipal budgeting class is only held on a Saturday because of the length of that. And I've attended it before, and it's just so useful as we go into the budget season that I'm participating again this year.
So that the timing is right. And the
timing is perfect. It's great. Exactly what I need when I need it.
So what would you say to other municipal officials? Would you recommend that they participate in the CCMO program?
I would absolutely recommend that they participate in the program and the classes. It's not the certification, it's the knowledge that's gained through the certification process. The certification it's a lovely thing to have, the acknowledgement that you've completed a certain number of course hours. But it's the knowledge that's gained. And again, going through the classes on a regular basis is really helpful.
So it's not just something you put on a wall, something you can use every day in your job.
That was my purpose in doing it. I needed the knowledge. I needed to be able to do a better job than I could do without having those classes.
I'm sure the people of Marlboro appreciate that.
I hope so. We'll see. We'll see next November.
Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Matt.